In 1911, the unimaginable happened. The world's greatest museum, the Louvre, was robbed in broad daylight. Its crown jewel, Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, simply vanished. No alarms, no witnesses, no trace. The priceless painting that drew thousands every week was gone, leaving behind only an empty frame and a mystery that shook the entire world. Panic gripped Paris. How could someone walk into one of the most guarded buildings on Earth and steal its most famous treasure without anyone noticing? For weeks, detectives searched every corner of France. The media called it the crime of the century. Rumors spread like wildfire, from secret art collectors to international spy rings. But the truth was far stranger than fiction. The man behind it all wasn't a criminal mastermind or a wealthy thief. He was an ordinary worker, a quiet Italian handyman who outsmarted the Louvre itself, Paris, 1911. The city of light, art, and culture. The Louvre Museum stood proudly at its heart, home to the most extraordinary collection of masterpieces in the world. Among them hung a small portrait that had quietly captured hearts for centuries. Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. Visitors admired her mysterious smile every day, never imagining that soon she would disappear without a trace. On the morning of August 22nd, chaos erupted inside the museum. A painter arrived to find an empty space where the Mona Lisa once hung. The frame was gone, the wall bare. At first, staff thought the painting had been removed for cleaning, but hours later, reality struck. The most famous artwork in the world had been stolen. The French police launched one of the largest investigations in history. Detectives searched every hallway, questioned every guard, and even arrested well-known artists like Pablo Picasso. Yet the painting remained lost. For more than 2 years, the world was obsessed with the mystery. Newspapers called it the crime of the century. Museums tightened their security. And yet, the thief, a quiet Italian handyman named Vincenzo Peruggia, lived calmly in Paris, hiding the painting in a wooden trunk in his tiny apartment. He didn't steal it for money or fame. He believed he was reclaiming a piece of Italy's soul, bringing Da Vinci's masterpiece back to its true home. When the Mona Lisa was finally recovered in Florence in 1913, the world was stunned. The painting returned to the Louvre, but nothing was ever the same again. That daring theft turned a simple portrait into the most famous painting on Earth, and made one ordinary man a legend in the world of art and crime. In the early 1900s, Paris stood as the cultural capital of the world, a dazzling hub of art, music, and invention. And at its heart stood the Louvre Museum, a sprawling fortress of history and beauty. The museum's grand halls were filled with masterpieces that defined civilization itself, sculptures from Greece, treasures from Egypt, and paintings by the greatest masters of the Renaissance. Among them, almost hidden in a quiet corner of the Salon Carré, hung a modest portrait, Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. At the time, she wasn't yet the global icon she is today. She was admired, yes, but not revered. The Louvre had far more valuable paintings in the eyes of the critics and collectors of that era. Yet this calm would soon be shattered by one man's quiet determination. Vincenzo Peruggia, an Italian immigrant, had come to Paris to make a living as a carpenter and glass worker. Like many others, he was poor, proud, and far from home. His work at the Louvre involved installing protective glass over artworks, a task that gave him access few others had. He moved freely through the museum's corridors, learning its structure, routines, and weaknesses. Guards came and went, workers carried tools, and paintings were often handled with minimal supervision. Despite its grandeur, the Louvre's security system was shockingly weak. Peruggia watched carefully, day after day. He noticed that employees wore similar white smocks, blending in easily among staff. He saw that the guards were often careless, that doors were left unlocked, and that on Mondays the museum closed to the public for maintenance. That was when the building was at its emptiest. But it wasn't just opportunity that inspired him. It was something deeper. Peruggia carried within him a quiet resentment. He believed that Mona Lisa, painted by an Italian genius, did not belong to France. He had read stories of Napoleon's soldiers looting art from Italy centuries earlier, taking home treasures that rightfully belonged to his people. And so, in his mind, stealing the Mona Lisa wasn't a crime. It was an act of patriotism. Still, he was no master thief. He was a simple man who worked with his hands. But sometimes, simple men do extraordinary things. As he stood before the painting day after day, cleaning the glass and inspecting the frame, a plan began to form. Quiet, patient, and impossibly bold. At the time, the Mona Lisa hung behind a protective glass case, which Peruggia himself had helped install. He knew exactly how it was mounted, how heavy the frame was, and how easily the painting could be removed. It was almost too simple. If he could enter the museum disguised as a worker, take the painting from the wall, and walk out unnoticed, no one would question him. He rehearsed the steps in his mind. He knew which doors led to the stairwell. He knew the layout of the corridors. He even identified a small service exit used by staff that could be opened from the inside. He would wait for the perfect day, one when the museum was closed, when there were no crowds, and when the building belonged only to workers like him. By late August 1911, the opportunity had arrived. The museum would close for its regular maintenance day, and Peruggia would be inside as part of the routine staff. There would be no alarms, no modern cameras, no suspicion. Just a man in a white smock, quietly performing his duty, or so it would seem. What began as a whisper of an idea was about to become one of the boldest and most famous crimes in history. The Louvre, the pride of France, would soon learn that even its walls could not protect its greatest treasure from the hands of one determined man. Monday, August 21st, 1911, the day Paris would unknowingly lose its most prized masterpiece. The Louvre was closed to the public, as it always was on Mondays, giving workers the chance to clean and repair exhibits without interference. To anyone passing by, it was an ordinary morning. But inside those massive stone walls, something extraordinary was about to unfold. Vincenzo Peruggia arrived early, dressed in the same white smock worn by museum employees. He carried nothing suspicious, only the quiet confidence of a man who belonged there. No one questioned him. He had worked there before. He knew the guards by face, and they knew him as a harmless Italian handyman. That familiarity was his greatest weapon. Peruggia moved calmly through the corridors until he reached the Salon Carré, where the Mona Lisa hung. The room was empty, silent except for the faint echo of footsteps from distant hallways. He waited a few moments, listening, making sure no one was nearby. Then, with steady hands, he lifted the painting from the wall. It came off easily. Too easily. He carried the painting to a small staircase nearby, one used mostly by maintenance staff. There, away from prying eyes, he carefully removed the frame and the protective glass, the same glass he had helped install months earlier. Beneath it was Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece, painted on a thin wooden panel. Peruggia wrapped the painting in a white cloth, slipped it under his smock, and prepared to leave. At one point, his escape almost failed. The door he planned to exit through was locked from the outside. For a moment, panic set in. But fate intervened. A plumber passing by happened to open the same door moments later, allowing Peruggia to slip out unnoticed. No one suspected a thing. And just like that, in a matter of minutes, the world's most famous painting had vanished. Peruggia walked through the streets of Paris with the Mona Lisa hidden under his arm, as ordinary and invisible as any working man. He boarded a train, and returned to his tiny apartment not far from the museum. There, in his small wooden trunk, he hid the painting. His secret, his prize, his rescued treasure. The next morning, the museum resumed its usual rhythm. Visitors strolled through galleries, guards chatted, and workers went about their tasks. It wasn't until the following day, August 22nd, that someone noticed the Mona Lisa was missing. A painter working nearby grew suspicious of the empty wall and asked another guard if the painting had been taken for cleaning. When no one could find it, confusion turned to alarm. By noon, chaos had erupted. The Louvre was shut down, and police flooded the halls. Every exit was searched, every worker questioned. Yet no one had seen anything unusual. The painting seemed to have vanished into thin air. Newspapers broke the story the next morning, calling it the greatest art theft in history. The French public was outraged, and the reputation of the Louvre was shattered overnight. Meanwhile, Peruggia remained calm. He read the headlines, listened to the rumors, and even returned to the museum once, blending in with the crowd of shocked visitors staring at the empty space where the Mona Lisa once hung. He knew the police would never suspect a simple handyman, especially one who had once been part of the museum's own workforce. He had done it. Against all odds, he had outsmarted the Louvre. And as the world searched desperately for clues, the Mona Lisa rested quietly in a dusty trunk just a few blocks away, hidden by the very man who had once protected her. That morning, the impossible became real. One man, armed with nothing but confidence, timing, and a worker's uniform, had humiliated one of the most powerful institutions in the world. The Mona Lisa was gone, and history had been changed forever. When news of the Mona Lisa's disappearance broke, it spread across the world like wildfire. Paris was in chaos. Newspapers screamed headlines in bold: "The Louvre robbed," "Da Vinci's masterpiece missing," "The crime of the century." Crowds gathered outside the museum gates, demanding answers. France's pride had been stolen, not by an army or a foreign power, but by an invisible hand. Inside the Louvre, investigators scrambled. Detectives searched every hall, every corridor, every storage room. The museum was sealed shut. No one could enter or leave. Yet, despite their efforts, there was no trace, no fingerprints, no witnesses, no clue. The French police, embarrassed and under pressure, launched one of the largest manhunts in history. The investigation quickly turned desperate. Detectives questioned hundreds of employees, maintenance workers, and guards. They believed the theft must have been an inside job. Soon, suspicion began pointing toward the art community itself. Paris was full of eccentric painters, sculptors, and collectors, and the police believed someone with artistic knowledge had to be involved. Among the first suspects were two men who would later become legends in their own right: Pablo Picasso and Guillaume Apollinaire. Both had connections to stolen art pieces from the Louvre, though unrelated to the Mona Lisa theft. Still, the police arrested them and interrogated them brutally, hoping for a confession. Picasso, terrified, denied everything. Apollinaire, under pressure, spoke recklessly, nearly destroying his own reputation. The scandal rocked the Parisian art world. But despite the drama, the Mona Lisa was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, the real thief, Vincenzo Peruggia, watched everything unfold in silence. He had hidden the painting in a wooden trunk inside his small apartment on Rue de l'Hôpital Saint-Louis. Wrapped in a simple cloth, the world's most valuable artwork rested in complete darkness, only a few streets away from the museum. Every day, Peruggia read the newspapers, following the investigation with quiet satisfaction. He had fooled them all. As months turned into years, the world's obsession only grew. The Mona Lisa became a symbol of mystery. Posters of her smiling face appeared on every corner. People from around the world came to Paris just to see the empty space where she once hung. Ironically, the theft made her more famous than she had ever been before. The French police even considered the possibility that the painting had been smuggled abroad. Border checks increased, art dealers were investigated, and every wealthy collector in Europe came under suspicion. Theories emerged that an American millionaire had paid for the theft, or that it was part of a larger political conspiracy. Each lead ended in failure. For over 2 years, the Mona Lisa remained missing. The case grew cold. Detectives resigned. The museum repaired its reputation, slowly reopening its doors. The French public moved on, though the wound to national pride remained open. During this time, Peruggia lived a quiet, careful life. He moved from job to job, keeping to himself. His motives weren't driven by greed. He truly believed he had done something noble. In his mind, he hadn't stolen a painting. He had returned it. He saw himself as a patriot, not a criminal. But over time, the weight of his secret began to grow heavier. The painting he had once viewed as a symbol of Italian pride had become a burden. He couldn't show it, couldn't sell it, couldn't even speak of it. It was as though the Mona Lisa herself was watching him in silence, her mysterious smile now a haunting reminder of the crime that made him both invisible and unforgettable. For more than 2 years, the world searched for answers, while the thief slept peacefully beside the most famous painting on earth. The hunt continued, but the man who outsmarted the Louvre remained just another face in the crowd. By 1913, more than 2 years had passed since the Mona Lisa vanished from the Louvre. The world had almost accepted that the masterpiece was gone forever. The French police had exhausted every lead, the museum had repaired its reputation, and public outrage had faded into myth. But in a small apartment in Paris, the painting still rested quietly, hidden in a wooden trunk under Vincenzo Peruggia's bed. For months, Peruggia had lived in constant fear and pride. Every time he looked at the trunk, he saw himself as a hero who had brought justice to Italy. But that sense of purpose began to fade. The painting, once his symbol of patriotism, had become a prison. He couldn't display it. He couldn't sell it. Even showing it to a friend could destroy him. He was trapped by the very treasure he had risked everything to steal. In December 1913, Peruggia made a fateful decision. He would finally return the painting to Italy. Not to the police, but to a respected art dealer who could help him present it to the Italian government. He packed the Mona Lisa carefully in a false-bottom trunk and traveled to Florence under a false name, checking into a modest hotel called Hotel Tripoli Italia. Once settled, Peruggia reached out to Alfredo Geri, a well-known art dealer, through a letter. He claimed to possess Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa and said he wanted to return it to its rightful home. At first, Geri thought the letter was a hoax. Many false claims had been made over the years by people seeking attention. Still, curiosity led him to arrange a meeting. On December 12, 1913, Geri and Giovanni Poggi, the director of the Uffizi Gallery, arrived at Peruggia's hotel room. The air was tense. Peruggia opened his trunk, lifted the false bottom, and carefully unwrapped the cloth covering the painting. When the men saw the faint smile of the Mona Lisa, their jaws dropped. It was real. The brushstrokes, the wooden panel, the subtle glow of Da Vinci's artistry, unmistakable. They hid their excitement and told Peruggia they would need to verify the painting's authenticity. Peruggia, believing they were on his side, handed it over willingly. But as soon as they left the hotel, they contacted the Italian authorities. Within hours, the police arrived and arrested Peruggia in his room. During interrogation, Peruggia explained his motive with calm sincerity. He claimed he had stolen the painting not for money, but for patriotism. He truly believed that Leonardo's masterpiece had been wrongfully taken by France during Napoleon's campaigns, and that he was only bringing her home. His explanation shocked investigators. The public in Italy, however, celebrated him as a national hero. Newspapers praised him as the man who avenged Italy's honor. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, cheering his name. At his trial in Florence, Peruggia's lawyer emphasized his pure intentions. The judge, swayed by public sentiment, handed down a remarkably light sentence, only 1 year and 15 days in prison, later reduced to 7 months for good behavior. Meanwhile, the Mona Lisa toured Italy briefly, displayed in Florence, Rome, and Milan. Everywhere it went, thousands came to see it. Not just for the art, but for the story. The painting that had once been overlooked was now the most famous artwork in history. In January 1914, it was finally returned to the Louvre, where France welcomed it back like a lost queen. Vincenzo Peruggia's bold act had changed everything. He had outsmarted one of the greatest institutions on earth and turned a small portrait into a global legend. His arrest ended the mystery, but his name would forever be written in history as the man who stole the world's greatest masterpiece, and almost got away with it. When the Mona Lisa finally returned to France in early 1914, she was no longer just a painting. She was a global sensation. The theft had transformed her from a quiet Renaissance portrait into the most famous face on earth. Crowds flooded the Louvre to see her, not just for her beauty, but for her story. She had vanished for 2 years, traveled across borders, been hidden in a trunk, and survived one of the most daring art crimes in history. Ironically, it was her disappearance, not her artistry, that made her immortal. Before 1911, the Mona Lisa was admired mostly by art critics and scholars, but after her theft, she became a symbol of mystery, genius, and intrigue. People from all over the world lined up to see the painting that had fooled France, captivated Italy, and confused the world. Newspapers printed her image everywhere. Songs, poems, and even cartoons were made about her. Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece became an icon of modern culture, the face that launched 1,000 stories. For the Louvre, however, the theft was a hard lesson. The museum had been humiliated on an international scale. France's pride had been shaken, and its art security exposed as shockingly weak. After the painting, recovery, the government overhauled its entire security system. Guards were increased, doors reinforced, and strict cataloging methods introduced. The theft of the Mona Lisa led directly to the modernization of museum protection across Europe. In a strange way, Peruggia's crime forced the art world to evolve. Vincenzo Peruggia's life after prison was quiet. He returned to Italy, married, and opened a small paint shop. For a time, he enjoyed minor fame. Some Italians saw him as a hero who had reclaimed a piece of national pride. But as years passed, the legend of the Mona Lisa grew while his name faded into history. He died in 1925 at the age of 44, never fully understanding how deeply his actions had changed the world. Yet his theft had far-reaching consequences beyond fame and embarrassment. It altered how humanity perceived art itself. Before the heist, paintings were valued for their craftsmanship. Afterward, they became cultural symbols, priceless not just in money, but in myth. The Mona Lisa's smile was no longer just an artistic mystery. It became a global obsession. Her theft marked the birth of art as celebrity. The story also sparked countless theories and copycats. Some claimed Peruggia hadn't acted alone, that secret collectors or nationalist groups had encouraged him. Others suggested the painting returned to the Louvre wasn't even the original. None of these theories were ever proven, but they added to the legend and kept her smile forever mysterious. Today, more than a century later, millions of people visit the Louvre every year to stand before the Mona Lisa. They take photos, stare at her small frame behind bulletproof glass, and wonder how anyone could have once lifted her from the wall and simply walked away. The irony remains. Without Vincenzo Peruggia, she might never have become the world's most famous painting. The heist changed everything: art, security, media, and myth. It proved that sometimes one simple man can rewrite history without power, violence, or wealth. Vincenzo Peruggia didn't steal gold, jewels, or money. He stole a smile, a quiet, knowing smile that still watches the world with the same mysterious gaze, reminding us that even the grandest institutions can be fooled by the courage of one ordinary man who dared to believe he was doing the right thing. The man who outsmarted the Louvre may have been forgotten by many, but his legacy lives on every time someone stands before the Mona Lisa and whispers, "How did he do it?"